All right, guys. So, welcome to the Soccer Doc podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Aaron Stairs, and today we are talking with a very special guest. We have the assistant coach and recruiting coordinator at UNC Asheville for the women's team, and that is Davis Fox. Go ahead and introduce yourself. How are you?
Aaron, thanks for having me, man. I'm doing well, holding down the fort here in Asheville. So yes, as you said, I am the assistant coach and recruiting coordinator for UNCA on the women's side. I've been here since last July, so just short of a year now. Before that, I was a volunteer assistant coach at the University of Rhode Island with the women's program, and also worked with NEFC, New England Football Club, as their junior academy director for the Southeast region. So a lot of my background is in youth sports, but I also have worked previously in the collegiate strength and conditioning world when I was at Flagler College in 2017 and 2018 as the assistant strength coach there, working with 9 different sports, including track and tennis, and then obviously the soccer teams as well. I got into collegiate soccer coaching when I was there, joining on as a member of the women's staff as an assistant coach there. And then I have a couple degrees in exercise science, one from Ball State University in Indiana, and then the other in sport coaching, which is kind of a synchronous effort between the sociology of sport and biomechanics from the University of Denver, which is a fantastic program. A lot of cool stuff going on there. So quick
Yeah,
shameless plug.
oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. That's a pretty extensive background. Where are you from originally?
From Indiana.
From Indiana. Okay, so you've been all over the country then, between that and Florida and everywhere else.
Yeah, I bounce around a lot. I like experiencing new things and seeing new places and meeting new people. So here I am.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. So, so what with your current role at UNCA, how do you apply all that background of the strength and conditioning, the biomechanics, everything else? Like, how does that all fit into your current role?
So a lot of it is down to load management. So I'm pretty big on making sure that everyone is ready to play at a given time and can hit their maximum potential, not just on game day, but also when we need them to in sessions, so that we can learn to adapt our tactical principles at the level that we are going to apply them in a match. And so a lot of it is GPS tracking, looking at data. A lot of it is working hand in hand with our strength coach, Cam Clark, who does a fantastic job and is very, very, she's very, very precise about how she does things, which I'm big on. And then on the recruiting side, it's watching a lot of film, seeing not only how athletes produce on this field from a skill standpoint, but also how they move. And I think that my background in strength and conditioning helps me a lot when I'm evaluating whether or not this athlete is ready for a Division I environment, and how they're going to be able to perform under certain circumstances and with our style of play.
Yeah, with the GPS stuff that you're all using, are y'all just tracking the kind of the amount of the sprint speed? What are y'all tracking with that, and what are you using for your load management?
Several different things. So one thing that we track mostly as a motivational tool is the amount of active time you spend in a sprint zone.
Yep.
And so we track this within certain blocks of our sessions. So especially during small-sided games, especially during scrimmages, especially during phases where we're doing like functional type activities, where we're working a specific phase of the game. And then during matches, obviously, we want to see how it kind of compares. And so we track, whenever you're moving above, I think we set it at 2 meters per second, just as kind of a baseline, how much of that time is spent in your own individual sprint zone, which for most players is around 5 meters per second. For some is a little bit lower, for some is a bit higher, but it's right there as our kind of team average. The other couple things we're tracking are, the top speed. That can kind of tell us how often you are recovering properly for a given session. Although obviously that kind of varies throughout the season and will vary from in season to off season to preseason. And so I kind of take account of that. And then the number of accelerations and decelerations is fairly important in terms of how many times you're changing direction and how that wears on the body. And so we try to make sure that, if that is high in one day, we're doing a bit of extra recovery the next and trying to limit that based on the, through the activities that we are implementing the next day. And then the other kind of side of that is making sure that we are tracking the load on the players in the weight room, and that's where Cam comes in. And that's something the two of us have been really, really interested in, because I think that tactical periodization and traditional periodization, the soccer side versus the weight training side, have been kind of separate for so long. Yeah. And what we would like to do is kind of integrate that. And I think that that's where that intersection point is kind of where the youth athlete can really start to develop themselves for a collegiate level at an early stage.
Right. Yeah, with the whole GPS and with all the tracking and everything else, it's an awesome little tool to really kind of get that load management. That seems to be kind of one of the hot topics nowadays is, load management and kind of how do you go about it. So when you're taking that data, are y'all taking, I've heard, a few different ways of using it, but are y'all taking the approach of if you see someone who's kind of in that overloaded area, are you kind of mandating days off or mandating more recovery time with them? Or is it more so a kind of say more of a kind of trends and things like that?
No, it's more trends than anything. I think that days off, because of the way the college season is structured, days off tend to be very tough by. And you have one built-in day off per week. But really it comes down to how we structure our sessions, and then the duration of those of each kind of phase of activity at a given point in the season. And then some specific athletes who, have played 90 minutes in a role where they are constantly cutting, constantly moving, think of a central midfielder who's just going up and back and up and back, a typical number 8, that athlete may have a lower load on a specific training day. If we're doing a 4v4 +3 rondo, they're probably going to get fewer reps than somebody who played 30 minutes and, on the wing. So it's just kind of individualized training at that point. And then we also split into functional groups quite often, which kind of allows us to work some groups harder than others, or, take the load off of some groups. Again, our midfielders probably average, among the three of them, I would say 6 miles per game. That's probably on average, which is decently high. Whereas our center backs average about, I think, 3.4 miles per game. So there's a pretty steep decline, when you compare positions, and it's the same with the forwards and whatnot. So again, a lot of it is how we plan our sessions, but then Cam and I are trying to kind of transfer that over to the weight room as well.
Yeah, for sure. And with your weight room sessions and kind of doing, trying that with the college season being kind of so short as in one semester, not being like a year round or kind of a full length, like professional season, right? It's more kind of condensed 2 games a week and everything else. And that may be changing soon, hopefully.
Yeah.
I don't know if hopefully.
Fingers crossed, man. Fingers crossed. We'll see.
But with that kind of hectic schedule, knowing the kind of the games that you have going on and kind of the cadence of everything, how do y'all structure, just generally, how do y'all structure, in-season training versus off-season training in terms of like amount of sessions per week and kind of, what kind of things are you focusing on during versus not during season?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So during the season, excluding preseason, because that's kind of a different animal, always have 2 lifts per week. Well, I will say 2 weight room times scheduled per week. Um, Depending on what type of game we've just come off, and who played how many minutes and ran so many miles and hit different thresholds in the GPS data. That will look very different from athlete to athlete. Some athletes will be doing just some body weight movements, a decent amount of what you would call recovery activities, stretching and band work and balance work. Others, who didn't play as much will be looking at, a more complete workout. It's almost always total body because obviously our sport is mostly lower body driven in terms of the fatigue factor. And so we don't want to harp on one, kind of area of the body more than others. But we also want them to have the mindset that like you must still work hard, you must still train, because we're going to need everybody, and you have to be kind of ready when your name is called to step on the field, and we need you to be fit. And so that's one of the biggest things that we have to adjust in season is who's doing what on a given day based on what we've done the previous days. Like I said, we are required 1 full day off per week by the NCAA, which I think we would probably give them anyway. But the other, 6 days of the week, you have soccer, 2 matches per week. For us, it's Wednesday, Saturday. For a lot of schools, it's moving to Friday, Sunday with their conference, or Thursday, Sunday. And so you do kind of find your rhythm as you go through. So if we have a Wednesday, Saturday schedule, Monday, we're definitely training. Tuesday is preparative, all, looking at these match. Wednesday, obviously, you have your match day. Thursday is going to be recovery. Friday is going to be preparative. And then Saturday's a match day. And then for us, Sunday's off just because that's how the schedule works out. Although I know a lot of schools will go, the day after you train, and then 48 hours later, you have your day off, which I would love to do, but it just doesn't quite work out with how we have things structured here. Right. But as far as training goes, what we're doing in training once we get into our matches is so much functional, that you're not doing a ton of fitness, you're not doing a ton of strength training. And so, coming into the season fit and strong, and ready for kind of the grind that is a collegiate season is critical. So what you do, in the summer is determines, how successful you're actually going to be, whether you're coming in as a freshman, recruit, or you are, returning as a senior. And so that's a big part of how your fall is actually going to turn out. In the spring, I won't say it flips, like where we go, oh, we had soccer, at 90% of our regime, and then our regimen, excuse me, and then strength training was 10%. It doesn't flip, but the strength training component certainly increases. And so we typically go to 4 days of strength-based training or weight room time from about November till late January, and then we back it off to 3 days. Now that's not all heavy lifting time, and what the structure of those workouts is will change based on what the phase of training that we're in, and then what we're also doing on the field. And so when we kind of hit that late January mark and go to 3 days a week, it's very careful conversations between the strength coach and myself, because we've got to know that if on a Monday there's going to be a lot of hamstring work in the weight room, we can't go out and go full on sprint, full field activity, probably on Tuesday and Wednesday, just because of the recovery time that's going to be associated with that, and the risk of injury that's going to be increased because of it.
Right. And a couple of the big misconceptions that I'm always kind of answering questions about is, the first is people always think, okay, I'm just going to train year round and I'm just going to see this steady increase or this kind of complete increase in all of my qualities all year round. And, I'd like to get your thoughts on it because the way that we kind of do things in our practice is really, when you're in season, we're just making sure that you're maintaining where you're at, right? You've done all your preparation for your season and you want to make sure you're maintaining throughout that season. And then you're making those
Sure.
big jumps in those kind of dedicated times, right? Maybe during your off season where you've maintained all year long, make this big jump, then you're maintaining that big jump during season and making sure you're not losing that performance or you know, losing that edge because of, fatigue or injuries that may happen during the season. What are your thoughts on that when it comes to, can you consistently improve on things and training qualities year round, or do you typically do it more of a block style where you're kind of maintaining?
Yeah, and that's an interesting question that I try to grapple with and understand more and more as I go through my career.
No.
The way I kind of handle it and describe it to athletes here at UNCA and anyone I talk to is, you know, you do need to, like you said, you do have to build your fitness going into a season, because I would even argue that maintaining something is probably a bit unrealistic, especially when it comes to strength standards,
Mhm.
because you're always going to see a bit of a decline. I mean, you can take, do your one rep max on day one, and it
Mhm.
is almost always going to be more than your one rep max on the last day of the season. And
Right.
so,
Yeah.
your strength is going to drop off, but the higher that is, the higher it is at the end of the season. It's just the way it works.
Right.
Um, so you want to start, at the highest point that makes sense for you.
Mhm.
And we can get into a discussion of how much strength is a soccer player if we want to, but the highest point that makes sense for you, because as you decline throughout the season, you still want to be kind of in a zone where you can perform optimally and at your max every time your name's called for game
Right.
day. In terms of off-season training, yeah, I mean, we do blocks, especially from like the November to late January window. That is very much a strength and hypertrophy
Mhm.
block, which I know is a bit classical and a bit, I wouldn't call it old school, but it's a bit old school. So you kind of look at strength and hypertrophy during that phase, just because we take time off from like uh, training extensively. We only have a certain amount of time to train per week, based on our conferences regulations and NCAA regulations. And so a lot more time is able to be spent in the weight room, and then also conditioning, if we want to do some sprint work or what have you. Um, but yeah, so that's kind of that block. But then when you get to January through whenever your semester ends, you're also trying to figure out tactical concepts, and you're also trying to get better at your sport. And so that for us is kind of a time to maintain as well. You're going to gain probably some in the strength category, but that's going to be almost a little bit of a plateau, and that's, for us, that's okay, because we know that in the summer we can kind of resume a bit more strength training, a bit more targeted conditioning, again, depending on what our style of play is, depending on the quality of players we have, and then the resources that are available to each individual. So it's never a linear increase throughout the year. It just doesn't work that way. There are going to be ups and downs and plateaus and
Yeah.
all
Exactly.
phases of training. So
Yeah, exactly right. And that's kind of like I said, the big misconception that we see when people talking to either a club coach or a parent or an athlete, right? They always kind of have that expectation of, hey, I'm already playing club. I'm playing for my high
mhm.
school also. I'm doing all of this stuff. Can we add in some training with you also, and so I can continue doing this? I'm like, well, doesn't quite work that way, but here's what we can do for you, right? Yeah, and it's probably a little bit different on our side too, because we do have, for us, for the load management piece, it's all the different components, right? Club, high school, the weight room that they have in school too. Everyone's
Multiple sports.
multiple sports. Exactly
Yeah.
right. There's so many different factors that go into your training cycles and your training year. So what the approach that we've kind of adopted in the clinic and in the gym for us is we typically never really work on conditioning with an athlete because they're getting that everywhere else. We don't want to overload people. So, I mean, we've kind of adopted the conditioning side of things is you're going to get by just playing your sport and doing what you're doing. We're just going to focus on those little things that your body needs, right? Do you have a mobility deficit at your ankle? Do you have something going on somewhere, a glaring asymmetry or a glaring strength deficit, right? Those are kind of the things that we want to work on as kind of a separate entity to your club and your high school, and then trying to get all those things together. So going into the college game, it's a little bit different where you kind of have everything in-house, right? It's a little easier to communicate those things and really,
Oh yeah.
really communicate a
Oh yeah.
comprehensive program. So it's a little bit different depending on what age group you're at. But you'd mentioned before you also coaching club. So what kind of things are you taking from the college kind of game and kind of your background and applying to the younger population?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and one I talk about with a lot of my peers quite often. I think for me, the biggest thing is no, I'll say there's two big things. Number one is the technical application, of skill and how much of a deficit I see in, our players at the collegiate level. And so like so much, even for my U13, so much of our time is devoted to being able to apply technique um, under pressure. And so a lot of it is one matchups, not necessarily just 1v1, but where you have to win a battle somehow with an opponent who is directly, opposing you. And so that might be within a 4v4 game, but there have to be constant matchups involved. So that's one thing, because I think being able to apply the technique under pressure,
Yeah.
and with opposition is critical. The other part is the tactical applications that I think we see deficits in with our players at UNCA and across the board. So like I said, this is kind of a thing that I talk with people about a lot. But for us, one of the things that we have been working on is not just problem identification, but like problem solving. Mm-hmm. And so I try to give my players tactical problems to figure out, whether it's through small-sided games with different, I don't want to call them restrictions, but different objectives, or technical skill applications with different things that they have to work through mentally and figure out as a collective. And so that's a big part of what we do is what I kind of bring to the table is the tactical and technical applications that we feel our players are currently falling short in. On the physical side, so much of my time is devoted, especially working with young girls, is devoted to unilateral balancing activities. And so a lot of single leg activity and activation. I don't do the typical, dynamic warm up. I don't do the FIFA 11. I do a lot of balance work. I do a lot of functional mobility with them, especially on single leg, because I just find that, that is so much more applicable than, oh, I'm doing a quad stretch, oh, I'm doing a hamstring stretch, like, can you do a controlled single leg RDL, consistently on both sides, keeping your hips square with the ground, keeping your core tight, and I'm very particular about it, and they know that. And so they've kind of gotten to the point where they're very well drilled on it, so that even if I leave them alone, like it just happens, as if I was there. And then the other part of it is like the dynamic mobility, and so it's kind of explosiveness off of one leg then, so single leg hops, bounding, it might be lateral movement and being able to shuffle and push off, with one leg, or change direction. And so those are things we're constantly going over in our warm-ups, and that's the opportunity that I kind of have to teach them physical skills and how to be mobile and how to be an athlete. So
Yeah, it looks a little bit different for those young female athletes, right? It looks a little bit different. It's all about the that balance and coordination. Can you control your body, especially knowing that going through those growth spurts in those younger age groups and things like that, it's being able to control your body in those kind of short periods where maybe 6 weeks ago you were a great athlete, but then you grew
yeah,
3 or 4 inches.
yeah,
Like, well, what the heck is going on now?
yeah, yeah. It's and that it can't be overstated how much the growing body affects how we need to adjust our training,
Mhm.
because there's just, I mean, especially when you're in that kind of middle school range. I have some athletes who would benefit from like full real strength training, because they have gained muscle mass and their bodies are like they're grown, like they are ready to be a true athlete. And some who they have not put on any muscle mass, they still look like a very young athlete who has who just isn't ready for that type of training. And so you have to make considerations for that. But I think that teaching them how to move
Mhm.
properly is a really good way to start. And then you can start to deal with it on a case-by-case basis and make recommendations for a more advanced athlete, like hey, you need to start seeing somebody like yourself that will be able to challenge you a bit more. If as a soccer coach you don't have the resources, if you don't have a strength and conditioning trainer, or you don't have a full weight room where you can do band work, where you can do you can utilize different types of equipment. And so I think that that's just something we as coaches need to start being more cognizant of. So
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. When you kind of extrapolate that out and you kind of go through those age groups kind of more into that high school age where they're kind of thinking about, hey, I think I'm good enough to play in college. I think I have a shot at this. And they start getting a little bit more serious on that kind of strength and conditioning side as well as the technical side. What kind of things are you looking for as an assistant coach or as a kind of recruiting coordinator? What kind of things are you looking for from a technical standpoint from players who are maybe in that age group? And what are you looking for from like a sport performance, maybe a fitness standard standpoint?
Uh, so the number one thing I look for is whether or not you move well. Um, I think it's when you get into high school ages, and this is why I key in on it so much when they're in those developmental periods. But when you get into a high school age range, you have typically started to solidify your movement habits. And my philosophy is that an athlete who moves well is going to have a lot more success at the collegiate level, where things are faster, they are harder, and they're just more brutal in terms of the duration of the season, the intensity of it, and the cadence of it. Um, if you move well, you'll have a lot more success in that type of environment than if you just happen to have a little bit more speed than someone else, or a little bit more strength than someone else, but don't move well. If you can't decelerate, if you can't change direction, if you aren't balanced, I tend to worry about that athlete a bit more than I do someone who's really well balanced and maybe doesn't have the top end speed or the top end strength. So I value balance. I value stability. I value, again, functional movement over just one top end quality. So that's what I look for. That's not to say the top end quality is bad. Like, be fast, be strong. That's an excellent thing. But I think that, it's worthwhile for that athlete to start, working on how they move and addressing some of the deficiencies that they may have in their movement at that time. So, and that's kind of what I'm looking for. And I think that probably means you need to find someone, if you're looking to address those issues, you need to find someone with the proper background in it, because I think that exercise is good, but proper exercise is better. And so finding someone who has, an athletic training background, a physical therapy background, and in particular, if you can find that combined with a strength and conditioning background. So if you find a CSCS, I highly recommend, certified strength and conditioning specialists. If you find someone with an additional, USAW cert, USA weightlifting, or corrective exercise specialist, that's great. And then if you can find someone, if you get the trifecta, if you get somebody with AT, PT, CSCS, and then like an additional certification, and then someone who has been in your sport, has a background in your sport, then you are in a really good situation. And so I just think it's really important to have proper exercise and proper guidance when you are looking to do strength training. You're thinking about college, you're thinking about getting recruited and showing, how durable and how well you can perform, because those things are going to benefit you long after the recruiting process is over.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's funny, on previous podcasts, we've talked to a few other different coaches on the recruiting process, and they've kind of said the same sentiment on the strength and conditioning standpoint and kind of getting ready for things, but also just in the process itself, not messing up the process of contacting coaches. Because apparently I didn't know how prevalent it was for coaches to get emails to the wrong name, to the wrong program, a generic email or something like. And I've heard a bunch of horror stories lately from from coaches about that.
So, yeah, that is a common thing. Yes. So a couple of things that coaches don't like. Number one, we don't like getting emails from parents. The way I kind of view it is, the recruiting process is between me and an athlete. The financial process is between the athlete and their family. So, like, can we afford this? That's a conversation for you to have with your family. The is it right on the soccer side? Is it right on the social side? Is it right on the academic side? That's between me and an athlete. And so, like, I want to talk to athletes. I don't want to hear from their parents unless they have a specific question about how you do something. Like, if you need help with applying for financial aid, I can direct you to the right person. But that's that I don't want to have an ongoing discussion with you outside of expressing to you that your child will be taken care of, the resources that are available to them. That's just not something I would engage in too much. The other thing that we don't like is getting kind of the generic email. I think that organizations like NCSA have done a great thing in informing people about how to get recruited. I mean, I remember being a high school athlete who had no idea how to get recruited, no idea how to talk to college coaches at all. So NCSA has changed the game, and again, other organizations like it, other sites like that. But it has also enabled athletes to kind of duck the personal, time that it takes to find actually the right school, and what it, like look into it more than just like, oh, there's the name of a Division 1 school, cool, here's UNC Asheville, go Bulldogs, and throw that in there as like this, like this little carrot at the end, like this will get the coach, hooked or whatever.
Yeah.
I think that taking the time to look at the programs and see what the school actually offers, and see how successful they have been in the past, is really important. Because if you say, if I go 1-17 and I get an email that says congratulations on a great season, like,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I don't really want to talk to you right now, about how great my season was. Like that for me is really, really critical, is that the athlete does their research and personalizes the email, because I personalize emails to athletes. Like I don't do like the generic just email blast. I'm very big on, like, if I saw you at ECNL Sanford, I'm going to tell you that I saw you there, what game I saw you at, and what I liked about what you did. And so I expect athletes to kind of, return that personalization if they're really interested in coming to my school. And then so this is one thing that is that is controversial, and not controversial, but there's a lot of like opinions about what we like and what we don't. But as far as video goes, like, some college coaches really like highlight videos. Some college coaches are like, send me 90 minutes. I think, highlight videos, in my opinion, again, this is just my opinion, are awesome for catching someone's eye initially. Once I see a highlight video, typically ask for like a 15-minute segment that best represents what you can do as a player. And it should be continuous. So like, if you pick a half, you like, this is my best half of soccer, then pick the best 15 minutes from there and just have that ready for a coach. I think that's pretty critical, in the recruiting process, because they're going to want to see, not just, can you do this once, but how do you, react after that has happened, after you've made a great play. Like, did you sprint up to support? Did you then are you sprinting to, pressure the next ball, the next play? Like, are you keeping up your intensity? And so I think that, as far as video goes, having a little bit of both, a good mix of both, is really helpful.
For sure. No, it's really, really good advice. I think everyone's going to appreciate that. It just kind of gives people some clarity on what people are looking for. And not every coach is the same, right? That's the kind of the journey.
Correct.
So every coach is looking for something different. So having those in your arsenal, maybe starting off with your email with your highlights, but then having that 90-minute or that 45-minute clip also, just to make sure that the follow-up's there, and like, oh crap, well, I don't have
that. Yep.
Awesome. Yeah. So for you, at UNCA, if you have, your group, your team comes in from summer break, they're coming back into preseason, are there certain standards that you're looking for your players to be meeting? Do you guys do fitness tests, or do you guys not? I know every program is a little different on that also.
So I'll speak like a little bit generally here. So yeah, you're right. Every program is a little bit different. Mm-hmm. I have been at a program where, we did 2 fitness tests, and there were minimum standards. I've been at a program where there was 1 fitness test and there was a minimum standard. And I've been at a program where there was a fitness test where the only standard was that you had to complete it. Mm-hmm. Which I think those are all interesting, kind of variables, and how they affect athletes, both from a training standpoint and then from a psychological standpoint, is probably a whole other discussion, but is important nonetheless. But what I would say is that, an athlete who is getting ready to go into any collegiate environment, I would talk to the other athletes who are already there. Make sure you're connecting with them and go, hey, listen, what is it actually like?
Mhm.
Because the fact is, like, you just haven't experienced anything quite like a preseason in a collegiate environment. And the more you can, kind of hear from people who have, the better off I think you are. And another thing to ask them is like, what are the fitness expectations? What are the standards? And what are the, tests we're going to do when I get there, so that you can train. And I don't think that training specifically for a fitness test is always the best idea, but I do think that it does go a long way in um, gaining you the respect of the team and of the coaching staff if you come in and can do well on any test they present you with. That's one step that I think, from a social standpoint, from a sociological standpoint, can really help you along when you get there. If they don't have a fitness test, I mean, you said it on the conditioning side. Like, the biggest thing I think is playing the game. You guys don't do a ton of conditioning because the athletes are in their sport and they're getting that from that. And so I think that if you're an athlete, during the summer, the more you can get out and play small-sided games, the more you can be on the ball and do technical conditioning, the better off you are. And then again, from a strength standpoint, the more you can balance your body and make sure you move well, and then add strength onto that, the better position you're going to be in when preseason starts. And you're going from traditional strength and conditioning modalities to all of a sudden soccer, and some of that strength inevitably drops off.
Right, right, for sure. Yeah, and that's kind of what I saw in my own experience, right? Playing college ball. I mean, this is probably 10 years ago now, but at the time when I was being recruited, I didn't see much of from a personal experience, I didn't see much of a difference when it came from my last year of club to my first year in college. There wasn't a huge jump. There was a little bit of a jump, but there wasn't a huge jump on the technical side of things. But there was a massive jump on the strength and conditioning side. And that was kind of the big thing that I kind of struggled with a lot. And then kind of preparing for that first college season, I was always kind of told, hey, like, and this, like I said, like we kind of touched on, every program's a little bit different, but from what I was told, it was all for the program that I went to. It was always just make sure you're fit enough to pass these tests. We hold high standards for these tests for a reason, and it's because we want to get you up to speed, especially when it's your first year. If you're up to speed on it, then it just makes your life so much easier going into the season.
Yeah, and I think that, by and large, fitness tests are a more of a cultural phenomenon than a
Yeah,
physical one.
yeah,
And yeah, they're so much just a marker of, do you belong here, more than like, do you fit in here, I guess, more than like, should you be on the field because of this. And so I think that again, it's important. It's an important tradition. It's an important part of the process. I will not minimize it by any means, but I think that you still need to, regardless of what fitness test they have in place. So whether you're doing the Nike Spark, whether you're doing the Gauntlet, whether you're doing the Manchester United, um,
Mhm.
you still need to, again, be engaging in strength and conditioning, proper strength and conditioning.
Mhm.
You still need to be working on functional movement and balancing your body and making sure that you can move safely for an entire collegiate season, under a lot of duress. Because frankly, it's like you said, the game doesn't change technically or tactically very much. It changes physically, and you're playing against grown men and women, and that's it. If a freshman comes in 17, 18 years old, the experience of going up against someone who's 21 or 22 is just unlike anything you have experienced at this point. It's not like freshman in high school going against a senior in high school. The jump is much, much, much bigger because the physical training is much, much different. So I can't emphasize how important that strength training is.
For sure, for sure. So kind of just bringing it back to kind of current day, right? With all the stuff that we've got going on past couple months, everything's been disrupted with training cycles and being able to practice and things like that. What's your advice to individuals right now in terms of staying on top of their training?
Yeah, I think one of the things that well, I'll give you a couple things we found effective and that I've found effective in my everyday life, because even as a fitness junkie who's got who's got barbells in his basement, it's been difficult to maintain motivation and continue the kind of habits that I had, and the rhythm that I had, when everything was just flowing. One thing is to take it just day by day and even moment by moment. I think it's critical that we don't look out and go, oh man, we don't know when this is going to end. Everything's uncertain, and let that take away from the moment that we are in, because frankly, every day and every moment is an opportunity to train. Every day and every moment is an opportunity to get better. And there's no reason that the uncertainty of the future should stop you from taking advantage of that. The other bit of advice I would give is start a new routine. Everything's kind of been shaken up and thrown off, but I think that there's so much value in habits and the building of a kind of routine for the day. So when you get up in the morning, have something that you do every single morning around the same time, whether that's making breakfast or making your bed or going for a run or exercising or reading or studying or whatever. Before you go to bed, have something that you do, whether that's, again, making dinner, whether it's reading a book, whether it's meditating or stretching. Have something that kind of marks the end of your day, and then kind of, I would say, build it out from there and say, well, this is, if a run isn't the first thing you do in your day, maybe it's the thing you do at 11 o'clock every day. If lifting isn't the thing you do before you go to bed, maybe it's the thing you do at 2 p.m. or whatever. And so just kind of have a routine, have a sequence for the way things are going to go, because I think that's gonna keep you kind of going even when your motivation dips, because that is just what you do.
Yeah, that's really good advice for sure. Those routines are huge for sure. And even right now, it's so easy to, sit on the couch, watch some TV and say, oh man, it's been 4 hours, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. Now, if you are struggling with kind of that motivation piece, or or struggling to kind of get started, right? You don't have to do everything at once. Just do one thing. Just that's why I
Correct.
always tell my athletes getting started is we don't want to make sweeping changes all at once. We just want to do one thing. Can you do that one thing well? Okay, you're doing it well. Now add another one, and then just kind of repeat until a couple months down the line, you're an elite performer. You're doing all the things that people in college and pro levels are doing, and then it's just staying consistent with it.
And I'm so glad you said that, because it does carry over to what we do in athletics. We didn't get to 500 juggles in a day, right? You don't get to 1,000 juggles in a day. When my U10s and U11s are trying to juggle for the first time, they get one, and then they get two, and then they get three, and then they get four, and then they, get it on their thigh. And it takes time, and there are stages of development that you have to go through. And so taking it moment by moment, but also, getting a task done and accomplishing something, and then adding something on really, really helps. You don't have to do it all at once. So I think that's really the way to go about it. And it's more of a philosophy for everything in sport than it is just this kind of singular cultural moment that we're in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's gonna go, build the habits now, so when everything goes back to the normal, then
Bingo.
you got this brand new routine that you're doing. It's perfect. Yeah, and we kind of touched on it before we kind of started recording here, but one thing that I haven't done yet with my athletes, but I'm going to start doing, because I actually heard this from a parent the other day. I was on a call just getting them on board with our program, and they gave me a really cool idea. He was saying that I do this with my son. I've done it for years with him, and he's obsessed with soccer. And so what I do every month is we do a different player challenge. And so basically what he says is, if you want the Iniesta kit, then you have to train like Iniesta for a month.
Ooh, I like that a lot. That's very
Right?
good.
It's a pretty cool idea, right? So then, you're doing your work
Wow.
specific quality like Iniesta for that month, and if you've done it every day, then you get the jersey.
Wow, I like that a lot. I would have gone crazy for that as a kid.
I know, it's such a cool idea. So I'm gonna start doing. I think I'm gonna start doing that like on all of our social channels. I'm gonna start doing like a monthly challenge for a certain player. It's a pretty cool idea to
It's
do.
brilliant. Wow, man, I might have to implement that for my for some of my younger teams. That'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard it. I mean, it's funny. It just came out because I asked him, I was like, hey, so what are you and your, I asked the son, they're both on the Zoom call with me. I was like, hey, what are you doing right now? He's like, oh, I'm just going out every day and practicing my skills. It's like, what are you doing specifically? And then this whole kind of mind-blowing idea came out, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is, so,
That's really cool. That is really cool. Well, so there's one thing that we haven't really touched on, and it partly has to do with kind of the routine of training and whatnot. But I wanted to make a special note of something I feel is probably the most important tool for any athlete who wants to get into a college environment or just develop, in his own or his or her own club environment, and that's learning how to engage in recovery. And I think that this is a well overlooked thing when we talk about preparing for the next level of development. And because I hear lots of podcasts where they talk about, especially for young athletes, like, oh, you've got to get stronger, oh, you've got to get faster, oh, you got to practice your skills. But I think that, it's the teams that and the players that are able to recover the best and the fastest that end up having the most success over the long term.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to kind of just put a pin in that. I think that one thing in order to recover really well, you have to learn to do is learn to sleep. There's there's so much research out there on how much sleep we need and how sleep debt can impact us in the long term. And when you get into a collegiate environment where you're training, through preseason for 2 weeks, for you're doing like a soccer related activity for 3 hours if you throw like yoga or a team meeting or whatever in there, and then you have kind of your social events with your teammates, and you've got your devices, and you've got your social media, you've got this, that, and the other, just all kind of vying for your attention, and you can't ever turn it off. And then all of a sudden you get out of preseason and, oh, we've got matches, and that's hyping you up, and, oh, I've got school, I've got classes, I've got work to do, I've got to study, I have to stay up late. And then on the weekends, well, I want to hang out with my friends, I want to go out, I want to do this, that, and the other. Like the fatigue that increases with a lack of sleep over an extended period of time is something that no amount of strength training, no amount of functional training, no amount of skills training, no amount of jerseys that you get from your parents, your coaches, or whoever can ever fix. And so, when you're talking about recovery modalities, like sleep for me is one of the number one things. The other thing I think would be learning how to eat for recovery. Yep. And so making sure that, you are intaking an adequate amount of calories. I've heard of athletes, who are preparing for a collegiate season and trying to, burn fat or lose some extra weight on like 1,600 calorie diets, which I think is absolutely ludicrous. Like there's just almost no circumstance, for a collegiate level athlete going into the start of preseason to be at that low of a caloric restriction. And so I think that, understanding how many calories you actually need is massive. And I know on the women's side, that is even more tricky because of social standards for how we should look and act and behave. And then also B, the kind of stigma there is with muscle gain and looking bulky or looking like a man and whatnot. And so I think that that is a conversation that needs to be more thoroughly undertaken, both in the community and then with individuals. And so I think that I would love to see more clubs having people having I guess the resources to get young athletes in touch with good resources who can explain what nutrition looks like for a high level athlete to those athletes, because there's just so much there's a lack of information and there's so much misinformation out there that I think again, if you're talking about an athlete who wants to play at a collegiate level, they have to get the right information. Otherwise, they're going to really, really struggle with injuries, with, again, a lack of recovery, the inability to gain weight and maintain what they have built over the course of, an off season or a preseason or whatever. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a good point. It's so overlooked, across the board. And this is really a big one of the pillars of our programming. So whenever we have, like, with us, we have our Premier Soccer Performance Program, where basically we go through, obviously the training side of things. We do a little bit of technical portion of it just to kind of, keep things interesting during the training. But we also have the pillars of nutrition and recovery in there, right? And so we're definitely keeping on top of caloric needs, and also kind of what to eat, how to eat, and then the big kind of thing that we actually see a lot of the time is knowing how to cook, right? Or knowing how to put a meal.
How do you prepare food?
Yeah, how to prepare food,
yeah.
Right? Exactly. I mean, that seems to be one of the biggest boundaries that we've seen. And so, on the nutrition side, with what we do with our athletes is, we put together a separate course of just, if you're not ready to take on a nutrition course or go through a meal prep or anything like that, then we have kind of like this basic course that we actually kind of partnered with, like, a local company in town who's they're called The Good Kind, which is basically just it's a healthy eating kind of meal prep place. And we partner with them and some people their way to do like their cooking classes and like for someone.
Oh, cool. Oh, that's awesome. That's really good.
Right. And it's a pretty cool idea, especially for people who are in that kind of, younger age group, maybe going in, even in high school, you've not done that and you're going into college and now you're on your own. Like, how do you can't just rely on the cafeteria your whole life,
No. I mean, that's another thing when you're trying to prepare for college. I mean, knowing how to do laundry and cook are massive, So like, I think that those are just little things that make a big difference when it comes to getting ready for a collegiate environment, and can separate you from, I think, a lot of other athletes when you get there, and will make a difference in whether or not you get recruited and are able to perform on the field in front of college coaches, in a 3-day weekend at an ECNL event or an NPL event or even a state league event. So yeah, it all really ties together more than people think.
Yeah, it really does. Just kind of rounding it out, it really just comes back down to building your habits early, getting into them as soon as possible, so that they become automatic for you. So then it becomes a coach's dream for recruiting when you
Yes, it does.
No, that's awesome. All right, well, I appreciate all the time that we've done. We're coming up on an hour here, so we're maybe a little over. So I think that's some really great information for a lot of people listening, and taking some actionable steps. I appreciate your time today. I really appreciate all the knowledge and advice that you're giving out to us.
Aaron, thanks, man. I appreciate you having me on, and hope that I can come back soon.
Absolutely. Appreciate it.